Warhammer. That's right, today we're off to Warhammer World, venturing to try and find a very special Warhammer diorama. But of course, first we have to drop off and check on the good old Unforgiven boys. And I may be very late to the party, but the diorama we're checking out today is the Dropsite massacre from the Horus Heresy. Coming out earlier this year, I was really excited to try and find it, and my gosh, it's a big one, and it is really cool to see in person, and this is going to be the main inspiration for today's diorama as we're travelling to Isstvan V and creating our own much smaller diorama based on this Dropsite. But first things first, we need to start creating the base of the diorama, and thankfully I 3D printed the base of the diorama that we can build on top of. And with the first stage being gluing everything back together, it's time to get some plaster rocks that I created, grab our hot glue gun out and start gluing all this to create a nice rock wall. One of the things I noticed when looking at the diorama in person, there's a lot of like rock shelves going into the ground. And to make this look more realistic, I crumbled up a lot of these rock mold pieces and then just glued them together. Now, to make this feel more cohesive, I'm going to grab some crackling paste and put this all over the rocks and any gaps where you can just see the hot glue. And not only will this tie everything in together, it also adds a really nice effect where it looks like the rocks are cracking under the stress of the battle that's happening around it. And of course, this leads us to clay time, which is one of my favourite parts of building any diorama, and that's grabbing some air drying clay, and this will just make the whole ground of the diorama, making those nice mounds of dirt all over the base. And one of the things I really wanted to incorporate in this diorama is just some general kit bashing, and for this we're going to be making a radar dish tower out of the Millennium Falcon. Quite an odd one, I know, but this is just going to be using a bunch of fun little pieces and gluing them together and hoping it turns out looking somewhat like a radar dish or like a laser guided pointer. But I'm actually really happy with how it came out. I think it looks really cool and interesting. And one of the joys of Warhammer, nothing really has to make a physical sense. You can kind of believe it fits in the world. And just look at it, there's our cool little contraption. And to use some more Star Wars bits, it's time to add some pipe to the ground. I want this diorama to have a heavy industrial feel going on, like the ground has been oppressed. So once it was glued down, it's time to add some more air drying clay, just to make sure everything fits in and there's no weird gaps or floating areas. Which comfortably leads us to adding all of the dirt effects before we go into the painful task of building so many Space Marines. At the beginning of this diorama, I was definitely way too over-ambitious in what I wanted to achieve. When I looked at the Warhammer World diorama, there was just so many piles of bodies on top of each other, and at the beginning I was like, yes, I'll do exactly that, and as soon as I started building, I was like, hang on, I don't have the patience for this, so we're going to use a more structured feeling. So after drilling some holes into our lads, it's time to move on and glue all the rest of them together, which we can then glue all of the unfortunate salamanders to the bottom of the base. And this was surprisingly quite hard. You'd think just gluing some bodies to the ground would be quite easy. It was actually quite frustrating trying to figure out the right composition I wanted these bodies to be in, and eventually I chopped one of them in half, and I think it looks pretty cool. So then it's time to blend them all back together with adding some more dirt effects, before getting some Tamiya plastic putty out and adding this to all of the areas I cut off, and I think this is a great way to kind of symbolise a bit of that gore effect on your miniatures. And you kind of just get a really old brush and just jam it in there, and I think it looks pretty cool once it's dry. So to make this diorama have a bit more feeling, a bit more character, we're going to add some texture to all of the ground. And for this we're going to be using some foam moss and some little pebbles, basically any little things you can pour onto it to add some texture to that ground, to make it feel more barren and destroyed. And this is where we see if any of our hard work has actually paid off, and it's time to prime it, which now we can see if all of this actually looks like it fits together. And thankfully it does. I really like the look of this diorama so far, and this is where we start airbrushing the ground to add that dark brown feel to it. Now in the Warhammer World diorama, it's actually more of a dark grey green. When I painted this, I actually didn't actually look at it that much. So this is more of a brown rather than a dark greys and greens. And this is one of the worst parts when you're painting a diorama, is the first base coat, where you think, oh man, this looks terrible. And I kind of had this feeling when I started painting the salamanders on the floor. But this is the process pretty much any time when you're painting. There's that time where it looks terrible and you want to give up, but once you push through, usually you're pretty thankful and it ends up looking alright. But it's now that time to start painting the Iron Hands, and one of my favourite paint schemes ever is just painting it nice and silver. Reminiscing back just to the old medieval knights, having just silver power armour I think just looks iconic and it's so cool. And I will have a separate tutorial on how to paint these guys really quickly. But the best key to any metallic miniatures is just adding a black enamel wash. And of course I had to use that black enamel wash on all of the salamanders as well, as this really quote-unquote grimdarkifies them, basically adding more detail and making them a little bit more dull, but dirty in that way. And when it came to painting this big pipe or whatever it could be, maybe it was like a big power outlet, I wanted to paint them in these greys once again, as going back to the source material, the Battle of Isstvan V was pretty dark and pretty grey. There's not a lot of colour in all the artwork we see, even in the Warhammer World diorama they made. There's pretty much barely any colour on it. It's almost like it's been painted and then slapped on with a bunch of like grey filters. But I also wanted to add that bit of darkness to the diorama, and for this I grabbed some Uhu glue and started pulling it everywhere because this poor feather's just been chopped in half. What a sad day to be a salamander. And after quickly painting some more war rubble bits off camera, it's time to head back to our iron hands and paint some quick glow effects over his hole in his chest. I originally wasn't that sure about painting the glow effects on his face, but during a live stream I thought, hey, why not? Maybe the plasma has melted all of his insides and that's burning through the holes in his mask. And of course, this wouldn't be a good old Horus Heresy diorama without introducing the new Saturnine Terminators, one of the coolest upgrades of the old miniatures I've seen yet. These guys are just so cool, and I wanted to paint them in the Iron Hands aesthetic. Now I must say, this was pretty damn painful, painting the hazard stripes, but eventually we got there, and I ended up painting a lot of the glow effects in a lovely live stream that, if you are interested, you can watch. But overall, this was loads of fun. But yeah, make sure to let me know in the comments what miniature you'd actually like me to speed paint next, or maybe even do on a live stream. I've definitely done a couple of those before, and they're a lot of fun. I'd be really interested to see what you'd like to see me paint next. So after painting our Terminator, it's time to move on and start painting all of that blood. Which then quickly we can paint the satellite dish, and then cover the whole diorama in some juicy enamel paints. This is going to tie in everything back together and add those earth filters, those dark greens to the ground. And then a couple of days once it's dried, we can add all of our lovely miniatures back onto the diorama, and I think we can finally call this done. I'm super happy with how this came out. Let me know in the comments what diorama you'd like to see me tackle next. And of course, make sure to like and subscribe, it really supports the channel. I've been Reese, and I'll catch you next time.